Ableton producers, how are you guys doing today? In this video I'll be going over 8 different uses for MIDI effects, and these are creative kind of tricks that you can do using the Ableton MIDI effects. And I want to give a big shout out to patches.zone for this article and for letting me do videos on their content. I'll have the article in the description, but let's just go ahead and get started. Our first MIDI effect trick is to stack arpeggiators. And there's actually 2 ways of doing this, but first let me play my original chord progression. And if we add an arpeggiator, of course we have all of this, all of these drop down menus and a large selection of patterns. But as you can tell, it's pretty basic. So the first way you can stack arpeggiators is by adding a second one, and now this second arpeggiator is arpeggiating the notes from the first arpeggiator, so it's like a double effect. And I turn down the gate and I turn up the steps. And let's turn up the gate on this one so that the notes are longer and have more time to be arpeggiated. So now there's no way that this is possible with one arpeggiator. And imagine what you could do with different patterns. A different way of doing it is hitting Command G and then opening up the chain of the MIDI effect rack that is created when you hit Command G. And you want to create a new chain and put another arpeggiator on there. And what this is going to do is that now it's going to play 2 different channels with 2 different arpeggiator settings. So let's try something weird. And we can even create a 3rd channel. And let's try a downwards arpeggiation, and let's make this short. And now we have this whole stack of arpeggiators, and it creates this really complicated pattern. This next trick is also with an arpeggiator, and it allows you to automate the speeds of different drum instruments. And the most applicable use of this would be with hi-hats. So this is a hi-hat pattern that I came up with. So very basic, and if you add an arpeggiator and you set the steps to 0, that means it's going to keep playing the same note over and over. And we can actually automate the rate or the speed of the notes using this rate knob. And as well, what I like to do with this trick is turn up the steps. So I'll go to 1 step, for example. And instead of the distance being an octave, I will do something like either -1 or 1 or even 2 in some cases, semitones. And now it's going to switch up and down between 2 notes basically. And we can even go with 1 single note and stretch it the whole length of this pattern, and the arpeggiator is just going to keep splitting it up. So if we go further and let's do 2 or 3, we get some organic sounding patterns. This next trick actually uses a drum rack, and it is a trick for getting a random sample. So when you're creating organic drums, typically you want there to be a difference each time that you hit a certain note. Like you want it to play a little bit differently. And what this trick allows you to do is use the random MIDI effect, and it allows you to play a random sample when you click on a drum rack block. So right now we have a drum rack. What we're actually going to do is we're going to get a second drum rack and put it into the first kind of block right here. Now what I'm going to do is hit this chain button right here in the first drum rack, and I'm going to hit this I/O. and I want to turn the play to C1 so that the random effect will be activated each time. So then I go to the MIDI effects and get the random and put it right there. And I actually have a few drum samples, a bunch of claps. As you can tell, they're labeled HHE because they're from my Hip Hop Essentials kit. But what I'm going to do is drag that into this drum rack right here, into the second one. And now all of these are loaded into the second drum rack. And we can call this claps, I guess. Now obviously there's 5 choices, so what we want to do is we actually want to turn the random down to 4 choices, because our first sample is going to be non-random and the rest are going to be the 4 random choices. And we want to turn up the chance to a high percent, but not all the way to 100, because we still want our original sample to play every once in a while. And then the 4 other ones are going to be randomly chosen. So now when we click, it's actually playing random samples. And you can do this for every single box in the drum rack. This next trick is how to easily create chords and explore a certain scale using the chord MIDI effect and the scale MIDI effect. And how this works is that first we're going to start with a sound. So right now I have Serum and I made this really basic sound. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the chord MIDI effect. And what we're going to do is we're going to build a major chord. So let's do the intervals for a major chord. And if you didn't know, once you have a chord, you can transpose it and it's going to stay a major chord or a minor chord or whatever type of chord you made. So right now I'm just pressing one single note. So that's cool and all, but it's not really sticking to a single scale. It's kind of playing through a bunch of different scales. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the scale MIDI effect. Actually, I'm going to use a preset. Let's just use the C major preset. And now whatever note I hit, it's going to stay within the C major scale. And I'm going to transpose this to a D. And we're going to take all of these notes and put them at D. And same thing. Our next MIDI effect is note length, and this is pretty self-explanatory. If you turn up the gate effect, it's going to lengthen your MIDI notes, and if you cut it down, it's going to shorten them. And so let me turn this off for now. This is a melody that I came up with. And if you like that sound, it's from my Future Beats kit for Massive. And it's one of the lead sounds. It's lead number 3. And basically with the note length, we can shorten or lengthen these MIDI notes. I'm going to create a pattern where the first 2 notes are short and the last 2 ones are long. And we're kind of gonna have a transition between the 2. I'm going to keep repeating that. And basically that's the note length MIDI effect. The next MIDI effect we have is velocity, and I actually came up with this pattern with Tom from my Hip Hop Essentials kit, and this is what it sounds like. So it sounds cool. The notes are changing, so it sounds a little bit organic. But the problem is the velocity is still the same throughout each of the notes. So that's kind of unrealistic, and that's where the velocity MIDI effect comes into play. You actually have this random knob down here, and this is actually going to randomize the velocity. And you also have a low kind of an output low and you have an output high. So this is going to set the boundaries, because obviously you don't want a velocity of 0 on some of these, because it's going to be inaudible. So you kind of want to set the boundaries. And as you can tell, it's starting to vary the velocity a little bit. And that's the velocity effect in a nutshell. We can also add it to the hi-hats that we added earlier. And let's place it right after the arpeggiator. And now we're getting this very organic effect. So there you have it, the velocity effect. This next effect is probably the simplest of all of the ones we've covered, and it's the pitch effect. And this is going to allow me to switch scales. And as you can tell, I have this grand piano effect. And let's say I'm playing in the C major scale. And what we can do with the scale effect is we can actually pitch whatever I'm playing up. I can go into C sharp major. And that's B flat major. I can keep going down or up, and that's pretty self-explanatory. You can add it to any MIDI track and it's going to transpose everything that you've played up or down depending on what you put in the pitch. So this final MIDI effect trick is how to record what your MIDI effects are doing into actual MIDI notes. So as you can tell, I have this empty MIDI channel, and for this example we're going to get this stacked arp kind of thing that we did at the beginning, the first effect with all the arpeggiators, and this is what it sounded like. So obviously there's a ton of notes going on here, but all we're seeing is these big chords that we originally started with. So what I want to do is go from all ins and go to stacked arps. So now the input for this MIDI channel is whatever's playing out of this first channel with the arps. And I'm going to hit the arm button, and then I'm going to hit record. And there you have it. You have all of our MIDI notes. So as you can tell with those stacked arpeggiators, we could really create some complicated melodies, and it's just overall really cool. So that concludes this video on 8 uses for MIDI effects in Ableton. And again, shout out to patches.zone for coming up with these tricks and allowing me to make videos on their articles. The article for this will be in the description, and in that they go in depth about each of these tricks, and just checking out their articles will definitely give you some inspiration as a producer. Other than that, if you learned something or are planning to use these effects, then let me know in the comments below. But again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.